So you should have 3 handouts this week. You've got the mock test, you've got the lecture notes, and you've got a chapter from a book. Just because the main textbook isn't very good on this topic, so I've given you an alternative chapter. So you've got something else to read instead. Handouts are at the front. Right, let's get going. So last week we were looking at ways in which firms could kind of defeat the corner or Bertrand level of profit. Okay, so by following these trigger strategies in a repeated game, even when there was competition, we showed that firms could get close to the monopoly level of profits. Okay, so we showed that with oligopoly you can actually beat the corner or Bertrand level of profits in a repeated game setting. This week we're going to see if you can actually beat the monopoly level of profits. So we're going back to static games, but we're going to see if it's actually possible to get even higher profits from the profits under monopoly. And the way firms could do this is by something called price discrimination. Okay, so the most obvious example of price discrimination for you guys is student discounts. If you go to, I don't know, the Odeon will give you 10% off your film tickets. And the idea is that students have more elastic demand than everyone else. So if you can give students a different price than everyone else, you encourage more students to go, and that actually increases the profit the monopolist is going to get. So we're going to look at the different types of price discrimination and see how they can beat monopoly profits. It is recording, isn't it?
Okay.
Yeah,
That's a red button.
Good. Okay.
Red button.
Yeah, so the key thing that's going to make price discrimination possible is charging different consumers different prices. So with student discounts, you know, the Odeon looks to see if you've got a student card. If you've got a student card, you get a different price to if you don't have a student card. Okay, so I would like to get a student price for cinema tickets, but I'm too old, I can't get a student card anymore, so I have to pay full price. So no oligopoly this week. We're kind of going back to monopoly single level settings. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? Well, I'm going to show you the different types of price discrimination and what welfare is like under each of them. And then we're going to talk about tying and bundling. So tying is like printers and printer cartridges. As a standard example of tying. You buy a printer from HP, you also have to buy printer cartridges from HP. Bundling is kind of selling several goods together. So selling bundles of TV channels later. And then we're going to talk about durable goods and how selling durable goods is also a case of price discrimination, but it has some counterintuitive effects. Okay, and I've given you this handout in church and wear. This is just because the coverage of this material in OSHI isn't very good. Okay, so you've got an alternative something to read. But certainly everything mathsy we're doing will be covered well. So what is price discrimination? Well, fundamentally price discrimination is selling the same good at 2 different prices. Okay, so buy 2 get 1 free offers is another example. If you Sainsbury's filled pasta, before I got married at least, I used to buy a lot of Sainsbury's filled pasta, and it was always 2 for £2.50. So
it's more than that.
Is it really? Yeah. It's gone up. Oh, that's shocking. Okay, so the price is different depending on how much you demand. So if you just buy 1, you pay more than if you buy 2. Okay, so the types of people who want to buy lots of filled pasta are having to pay more than the types of people who only want to buy a single shilling pasta. Student discounts, what we mentioned. Off-peak rail fares is another one. You know, if you travel to London at 11 o'clock in the morning, that's it's the same good you're buying as travelling to London at 6 o'clock in the morning, but you're going to pay a lot more to travel at 6 or 7 than you will to travel at 11. And you can slightly generalise this definition. So you can think about price discrimination as selling the two similar goods at different ratios to marginal cost. Okay, so rather than selling exactly the same good at two different prices, think about selling two different goods at different ratios to marginal cost. And a nice example of this is something like posting a letter. Okay, my parents live in Scotland. If I want to post them a letter, it'll cost exactly the same as posting a letter to my sister who lives in Cambridge. Okay, despite the fact it's going to cost the postal service a lot more to get a letter to Scotland than it is to Cambridge. Okay, so marginal cost of sending a letter to Scotland is quite high, marginal cost of sending a letter to Cambridge is low, but you pay the same price for both of those goods. So that's also kind of price discrimination. Okay, so what do we need for price discrimination to be possible? Well, firstly, for good, we can't have a resale market in the good. You know, if it was a resale market in cinema tickets, then you students would rationally go to the Odeon, buy a load of cinema tickets at your discounted price, you know, 10% below the market price, and then sell them to people like me at maybe 5% below the market price, and you get some profit, I pay a bit less than I would pay to buy from the Odeon. Okay, so there can't be a resale market, otherwise price discrimination will just disappear. You know, whoever gets the cheapest price will buy lots and then sell it to the people who pay more. So Office, Microsoft do really good discounts for students. It's like it's a tiny fraction of the full price cost. You know, if Microsoft couldn't stop you reselling Office, they wouldn't be able to do that because students would just sell copies of Office, not either. One type of good which is very hard to resell is services. You know, if someone gives you a haircut, you can't resell that haircut to someone else. And this is one explanation for why Microsoft is now changing a lot of their products into services rather than bundled packages. If you buy Office now, you buy it for 3 years. You get a 3-year subscription to Office, and it lasts for 3 years and then it stops. Okay, so rather than being a product, it's now a service where they're renting you for 3 years. And this makes it easier for them to do price discrimination. We also need the firm to have some market power. You know, if there's perfect competition, price is equal to marginal cost, then firms can't even get started in doing price discrimination. There has to be some heterogeneity in consumers. Okay, there has to be some types of consumers who have different demand curves to other types of consumers. Otherwise, there'd be no point doing price discrimination in the first place. And somehow firms have to be able to charge different prices for these different types of consumers. Okay, and we're going to talk about different ways we can do that. So why would firms want to price discriminate? Well, the answer is kind of obvious, because it can increase their profits. Okay, so what do I say here? If you know, if you think about a standard demand curve, okay, here's a demand curve. Okay, there's marginal cost. Maybe the monopolist is selling this quantity. Okay, so the price is here. There's some CS and some PS. So, as far as the seller is concerned, this CS is all lost. You know, the seller would like to get this, turn this consumer surplus into producer surplus. So, the people who are buying the good, they're getting some surplus from that good. The seller would like a way of capturing that surplus. Okay, because the optimum for the seller would be to somehow design a system so that consumer gets no surplus at all. Consumer's just indifferent between buying the good and not buying the good, and all of the surplus goes to the producer. Okay, and this is particularly true if we're consumers who really highly value the good. Okay, so here with linear demand, consumer surplus looks quite small, but if you have a demand curve that looks more like that, then even with the same marginal cost and quantity, suddenly consumer surplus looks very big. Okay. So the producer would like to somehow capture some of that consumer surplus. Okay, and that's what price discrimination is going to enable them to do. It enables them to turn some consumer surplus into producer surplus, while not reducing the demand of the price per se. So normally price discrimination is going to increase profits, and that's why firms want to do it. There are going to be two exceptions that we'll look at where it won't increase profits. One is when selling durable goods, which we'll talk about at the end. This is kind of price discrimination in time. Okay, for people who want to buy it in the future, people who want to buy it now. And the other case we'll look at is price discrimination under oligopoly. But we'll look at that in a future lecture. Okay, so this is the graph I just drew on the board. Here's the producer surplus. Here's the consumer surplus, but the firm would really like to capture. And maybe they'd also like to capture some of this dead weight loss if they could. So there are three types of price discrimination we're going to look at: first degree, second degree, and third degree price discrimination. Okay, so we'll start with first degree price discrimination. And this is the least common in reality, but it still happens occasionally. And this is when the firm sells each unit at a different take it or leave it price. Okay, so the firm looks at you, judges you from looking at you and says, this is the price you have to pay. Okay, so the ideal thing the firm would like to do is to look at you, somehow work out exactly what your reservation price is, the absolute maximum you're prepared to pay for the good, and the firm will charge you that amount. Okay, so it's quite hard because the firm needs to know a lot about you. It needs to somehow work out the maximum you're prepared to pay and charge you that amount. But if it can do that somehow, then it's going to give all the consumers zero surplus. They're going to be paying exactly the amount they're prepared to pay. So they're gaining nothing from buying the good. So it's certainly going to maximise the firm's profits. And there's a nice example. So De Beers control almost the entire uncut diamond market. Okay, De Beers own all the diamond mines in the world, and how they sell diamonds is precisely in this take it or leave it way. So De Beers looks at you, and it's going to give you a box of uncut diamonds, and that's going to cost you somewhere between 1 and 25 million. So for a few diamonds in there, I guess. You can't negotiate about that price. If you refuse to buy at that price, De Beers says, fine, you can never buy diamonds from me again. So if you refuse to buy diamonds from them at the price they offer you, you're basically out of the diamond business for good. So you have to buy at the price they give you, and the price they give you is going to be chosen so that you're almost indifferent about buying or not buying. And if you try and buy diamonds from someone else, okay, if you try and buy diamonds on a resale market, then if De Beers find out about that, again, you're never allowed to buy diamonds from them again. So, it's incredibly harsh. It's amazing that they can get away with this, but international monopoly. So by doing this, De Beers are able to first degree price discriminate. So I say here that first degree price discrimination maximises social welfare. Can anyone think why that might be the case? It seems slightly surprising, right? That this thing that is charging these incredibly high prices should lead to maximising social welfare. What's going on?
It's charging every consumer their reservation price.
Yeah.
So that means that it's selling to consumers at all levels of the market, to the consumer who's right at the bottom,
Yeah.
with the lowest reservation price to the consumer right at the top of the highest reservation price. So the entire sort of triangle, if you will, is captured.
Yeah, exactly. So remember, we can think of demand curves as one interpretation of a demand curve is for lots of consumers, all with different reservation values for it. Okay, so you can think of the consumers as arranged on the vertical axis. Okay, and what's happening is, so yeah, this is price, this is quantity. So there's a consumer here who's prepared to pay this very high price. He goes to De Beers. De Beers charges him that price, so that's fine. There's the consumers along this line are prepared only to pay this price. That's the maximum they're prepared to pay. Well, they go to De Beers. How much does De Beers charge them? Exactly that price. Likewise, even consumers down here who are only prepared to pay this price, they go to De Beers, and De Beers is going to charge them that price. Okay, so every consumer in this triangle is going to get to buy the good, but these people who are prepared to pay a lot are going to be paying a lot more than these people who aren't prepared to pay a lot. Okay, so there's no dead weight loss, because everyone who should be buying the good gets to buy the good. There's no dead weight loss. There's no consumer surplus either. Everything is producer surplus. But when we look at total welfare, what we care about is consumer surplus plus producer surplus. So this is maximising social welfare, but it's doing it just by giving everything to the producer. Okay, so it's efficient, but it's horrible for consumers. Okay, maybe. Let's look at a particular example. Suppose marginal costs are 0. Okay, let's just have a few consumers. So quantity is going to be measured in people. So maybe this is going to be price in pounds. So here's £1, here's £2, here's £3. Okay, so maybe there's one person who's prepared to pay £1 for the good. For 2 people who are prepared to pay £2 for the good, for 3 people who are prepared to pay £1 for the good. Okay, so here's a person prepared to pay £3, here are 2 people prepared to pay £2, here are 3 people prepared to pay almost £1. And sorry, I've slightly misled you. There's one person prepared to pay £3. For a total of 2 people prepared to pay at least £2, there's only one person prepared to pay for whom £2 is the most they're prepared to pay. Okay, so for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. For 3 people there. Okay, 1, 2, 3. The first person is prepared to pay up to £3. The second person is prepared to pay up to £2. The third person is prepared to pay up to £1. And what happens is the first person goes to the seller, he gets charged £3 somehow, second person gets charged £2, third person gets charged £1. Okay, so everyone buys. The total producer surplus is £3 plus £2 plus £1. Okay, which is his 1, 2, 3 plus 1, 2 plus 1. Okay, so the producer surplus is just the area in the curve. Have I confused you? So the difficulty with first degree price discrimination is that it's very hard for firms to know what consumers' reservation prices are. Okay, so maybe you can see how someone's dressed, and if they're dressed in a sharp suit, they probably have a higher reservation price than if they're scruffy. But you don't know that. Okay, so it's only in very specific markets that it's possible. So in the diamond market, De Beers has these personal relationships with each of their buyers. They can start to figure out what most of their buyers are prepared to pay. And it's also not incentive compatible. Have you heard this phrase before? We probably talked about it in Micro last year as well. So these high value consumers, so someone who values the good at £3 here, say, they have an incentive to pretend to be someone who values the good at £1. Okay, so maybe they should wear a hooded top and old trainers when they go to the diamond shop in order to look like they can't afford to pay much. Okay? So the high value types would like to pretend to be the low value types. Okay? So whenever someone would like to pretend to be someone else, we say that's not incentive compatible. Okay, so we're now going to take a slight break from price discrimination and look at these things called two-part tariffs. And they're going to relate to price discrimination, and we'll get to how they relate in a few slides. Okay, so we're going to suppose for a while that all the consumers are the same. They all have the same demand function, inverse demand function P of Q. And the monopolist is choosing a pricing structure under which, if the consumer wants to buy Q units, they have to pay a total payment of F plus P times Q. Okay? So it's like if you enter a shop to buy anything, you have to pay F. And then for each unit you buy, you have to pay P. Okay, so this is what we call a kind of payment function, if you like, a total payment function. So you can think about gym membership, maybe. So the gym in Guildford is, what is it, £30 a month or £10 a month? I can't remember. So some gyms you pay a monthly fee, but then if you want to attend the spin classes or something, you pay another £2 or something each time you go. So it's a fixed fee, which you pay even if you never go to a gym, and then there's this extra fee which you pay each time you use it. Or mobile phone contracts are a bit like that as well. You pay £30 a month whether or not you use your phone, and then you pay something for each minute you use as well. So these are called two-part tariffs. So they're two parts because you've got one part which is the fixed fee, one part which is this kind of marginal fee. So let's suppose that the monopolist offers these consumers one of these two-part tariffs. So what do you think the optimal choices of this fixed fee and the price are going to be for the consumer? The graph slightly gives it away. So if you were from an monopolist, how would you design this two-part tariff? Go on, somebody. Yeah.
Would you like charge the people who use it more? Or
So everyone has the same demand curve. So it's the right idea, right line of thought, I think. Ideas?
Charge a high F and charge a low unit cost.
Yeah. Yeah, so how high should F be?
High enough to cover your fixed cost.
So what they want to do is they want to, exactly like you're saying, they want P to be low, and in fact, the sensible price for them to set is price equal to marginal cost. And they want F to be so high that the consumer is just indifferent between buying and not buying. Okay, so the sensible level of F is precisely consumer surplus. Okay, so they set F to the consumer surplus that firms would get under perfect competition. Okay, so under perfect, this is the graph under perfect competition, price is marginal cost. Perfect competition, consumers would get this consumer surplus. What firms are going to do is they're going to set the price to the price under perfect competition, but they set the fixed cost to this level of consumer surplus that consumers would have got had there been perfect competition. And then overall, consumers are going to be indifferent about buying or not buying. If they go into the shop, they pay this amount F, which just happens to be equal to this, and then they buy this number of units of the good, and from buying that number of units of the good, they get this surplus back. Okay, so it's like they pay their surplus and then they get it back. So overall, they're indifferent. So as long as the fixed fee is like 1 penny less than their consumer surplus, they're going to be prepared to do this. So just like you said, you want to set F as high as you possibly can, such that people are still prepared to pay the good. And the reason you want to set price to this level where price is marginal cost is that any other level of price results in some deadweight loss. Okay, and deadweight loss could be profits from the firm. The firm doesn't like deadweight loss either, because that's surplus that should have gone to work. With this pricing scheme, what's going to be the producer surplus? Sure. Everything, yeah, exactly. So, the firm is getting the CS from the fee and the PS from the price it's selling. So the firm is getting all of this area. It's completely efficient again, but all of the welfare is going to the producer, not the consumer. Okay, so these two-part tariffs are one way that firms can get even higher profits than we can under monopoly. But strictly, this isn't price discrimination, right? So we said for it to be price discrimination, there had to be different types of consumers with different preferences, and we had to have consumers paying different prices. So it doesn't really look like it satisfies the definition of price discrimination. But if you think a bit more about what has to be true in order for this to be possible, it starts to look a bit more like price discrimination. If this is what a firm was doing, then if I was someone who was rich, what I would do is I'd go to the firm, I'd buy thousands of units of a product, even if I only personally wanted one or two, and then I'd sell them to other people. Okay, so the firm has to be able to stop me buying large quantities of the good and selling them to someone else. Okay, so the firm has to be able to look at me and say, if I buy a large number of units of the good, it has to realise that that I want to resell them or something, okay, and then it would like to charge me a different price. So, in order to stop resale, it's as if the firm has to be able to do some price discrimination. So, the firm has to have a good idea of how many units you ought to be demanding, and if you start demanding more than that number of units, it's going to worry that you want to resell them. So, I don't know, you can think about markets for tickets to concerts. So, there is often a resale market for concert tickets, but the seller of those concert tickets doesn't want there to be a resale market. Okay, they want to do everything they can to ensure that once you buy it, the person who buys the ticket is the person who ends up going to the concert. And of course, in reality, there are going to be some variations in demand across consumers. Okay, imagine that some consumers just had slightly lower consumer surplus than other consumers. Then if you tried to set this fixed fee, which was equal to average consumer surplus or something, half of those consumers would not want to buy the good anymore. Okay, so it's very hard to do this if there's any variation in the demand curve across consumers. So again, to do this in reality, you need to be able to look at the consumer and kind of guess what their consumer surplus would be. Okay, so although this isn't strictly price discrimination, it doesn't satisfy this definition, in order to do it in practice, it probably is price discrimination. And this leads us naturally to second-degree price discrimination. Okay, when with second-degree price discrimination, we assume that firms can't see consumers' characteristics. Okay, with first-degree price discrimination, De Beers was looking at its buyers and guessing their reservation prices. Here, we just assume that firms can't see anything about the people that are buying their goods. Okay, just a string of people are coming to the shop, and some of them are going to be high value, some are going to be low value, but the firm can't tell which is which. And what they try to do is they try to get consumers to self-select into different price bands. So 2-for-1 offers at Sainsbury's is a good example of this. Or no, buy two get one free is a good example of this. You know, someone who's quite rich, maybe they're just buying a quick snack for themselves, they're just going to buy 1 unit of the good. Someone who's less rich wants to stock up, get the best deals, they're going to buy 3 units of the good in order to get this offer. Okay, so by having these 2 different price bands, you're getting consumers to tell you something about what type of consumers they are. You know the consumers who take the buy 2 get 1 free offer are going to be your less well-off buyers. So what firms do in practice? Well, they offer menus of different tariffs. Okay, so in the mobile phone world, this is different telephone contracts. You get contracts that will give you 1,000 minutes a month, contracts that will give you 100 minutes a month. People who choose for contracts that will give you 1,000 minutes a month, they're going to be high-value business-type consumers. So you know that they have quite inelastic demand, probably. You know that you can charge them quite a high price and they're still going to pay. So that's one way you can do it, is by offering different types of tariffs. Another way you can do it is by offering non-linear tariffs. Okay, and these 2-part tariffs we were looking at before are precisely an example of non-linear tariffs. So the price people pay is a function of the quantity they demand. So in a 2-part tariff, you know, the average price that someone pays, okay, so the total cost is F plus PQ, so the cost per unit that someone's paying is that divided by Q. So people have an average cost of F over Q plus P. So there's a non-linear pricing even with a 2-part tariff, right? The more you demand, the less your average cost for what you buy is. You know, if you buy 1,000 units of a good, then you don't worry too much about that fixed cost you have to pay. Okay, because divided by 1,000 units, that doesn't matter too much. So there are lots of these non-linear tariffs in reality, so buy 2 get 1 free, or rely on tariffs that are functions of quality as well. So rather than being a function of quantity, you can have a tariff that is charges people who want high quality products a lot more than people who want low quality products. So hardback books tend to be priced a lot higher than softback books. Okay, it costs a little bit more to produce a hardback book, but no way near as much as the difference in price between hardback books and softback books. Okay, so maybe it costs 50p more to produce a hardback book, but firms can sell them for twice as much because the people who buy hardback books are higher value consumers. You know, they're rich people with inelastic demand, they're prepared to pay a lot for the book. Another nice example is computer processors and graphics cards. So, you know, if you buy a graphics card from NVIDIA, I don't know, do people still have PCs? Your generation probably. Does anyone have a PC rather than a laptop? No.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few. Okay, so if you buy a graphics card from NVIDIA, it doesn't matter whether you buy the most expensive graphics card or the cheapest graphics card, you're probably getting the same processor. What NVIDIA do is they make all these processors and then they deliberately damage them, if you like. At the last stage of the manufacturing process, they just add a bit of extra solder that disables all the advanced functions, you know, that disables half of the cores on the processor or something. So you're buying the same product, but it's being deliberately damaged before it's given to you. So that ensures that so that means that they can start with one product and turn it into 2 different products. One that they can sell to high-value consumers, one that they can sell to low-value consumers. Okay, and because they've been damaged, the low-value consumers can't then sell it on to the high-value consumers. So it seems like a crazy thing to do, right? Deliberately damaging your product, but because it enables them to have 2 different markets rather than one market, it means they can have one high price and one low price, which is going to maximise the quantity they sell rather than one average price at which maybe not everyone would buy. So let's have a look at this mathematically. So we're going to code for equal numbers of high-value consumers and low-value consumers. So those with high demand we call H, those with low demand we call L. And the high-value types are going to demand more at any price. Okay, so their demand curve is going to be further out than the low-value ones. So in a mobile phone example, you can think of the high-value types as being business people, talk on the phone all day for work. So what the monopolists were like, so when we were looking at two-part tariffs, we saw that monopolists would like to offer a tariff which is the consumer surplus for the low-value type would get under perfect competition plus marginal cost times quantity. Okay, so just selling to the low-value consumers, we'd like to have a tariff like that. And if they were just selling to the high-value consumers, they'd like to charge a fixed fee equal to the consumer surplus for high-value types we get under perfect competition, plus marginal cost times quantity. But in reality, the firms can't tell the high-value consumers from the low-value consumers. You know, Orange doesn't know when you walk into a shop whether you're a businessman or a student. And even if they did know, maybe then the business people would start dressing up in hoodies in order to pretend to be students. Okay? So it's only really feasible for Orange to offer the same type of contract to both types. So one thing they might do is they could offer this tariff that the low types would accept to both the low types and the high types. Okay? The low types are just indifferent about accepting this tariff. Maybe you could offer this tariff to the high types, and you know that the high types can demand some extra units, so maybe that makes you some extra money. Well, in fact, they can do better than that. So here we've got two demand curves. Okay, here's the low types demand curve, here's the high types demand curve. And imagine that to start off with, the firm is charging everyone the consumer surplus that low types would get under perfect competition as a fixed fee, so all of this area, okay, plus marginal cost times quantity. Okay, and suppose that they decide to slightly increase the price they charge. Okay, so they go from offering this tariff of the low types that maximises surplus from selling to the low types to selling one with a slightly higher price. So they've increased the price from C to C plus delta. Okay? Because the price has increased, the consumer surplus of the low types has decreased, so the fee has to decrease by the same amount in order to persuade the low types to still buy the good. Okay, so the fee that the firm is charging is going to decrease by A plus B. Otherwise, the low types won't be prepared to buy the good. Okay, so the firms are going to lose A plus B on the fee, on their income from fees, selling to low types. But because the price has increased, that producer surplus has gone up by A. Okay, so they've lost A plus B in the fee, but then they get A back in the producer surplus from selling the good. So overall, from the low types, they've lost A plus B, they've gained A back, so they've lost B. What about from selling to the high types? Well, again, the high types were paying the same fee as the low types before, so they've lost A plus B from the fee that the high types are paying. But now, because the high types demand this number of units of the quantity, okay, the price has gone up. Price, so the high types have gone from so the old price we were demanding this number of units, the new price we're demanding this number of units. Okay. So they've so they lost A plus B on the fee, and then they're now selling this number of units at a price above marginal cost. Okay, so they've gained A plus B plus C on the revenue from selling each individual unit. Okay, they're selling above marginal cost now, so this is their new producer surplus from selling to these high types. So in total, from selling to a high type, so they've lost A plus B, they've gained A plus B, B plus C. So in total, they've gained C. So from selling to a low type, they've lost B, from selling to a high type, they've gained C. So whether this is good for the firm or bad is going to depend on whether B is bigger or smaller than C. Okay? But if you look at B, it's a triangle, right? Whereas C is like a C has a box bit to it. It's all very rough and ready, I know. So, if you think of delta very small, okay, the area of B is going to be proportional to delta squared. Okay, whereas the area of C is going to be proportional to this distance, which isn't a function of delta, times delta. Okay, so this is like delta squared. This area is like delta. So with delta small, this thing has got to be bigger than that then. So the gain from slightly increasing the price is going to strictly outweigh the cost from slightly increasing the price. Okay, so firms would, the optimum tariff for firms can't be this tariff that they would use for just the low value consumers. They'd like to charge a slightly higher price and a slightly lower fixed cost. Okay, shall I go through that again, as I wasn't super clear? So we'll go back to the start. Okay, so we imagine that to start with, the firm was offering this tariff where the price consumers had to pay was some fixed cost that was equal to the consumer surplus of the low types under perfect competition, plus an extra price that was the marginal cost times the quantity that they demand. Okay? So to start with, the low value consumers were just indifferent between buying and not buying. Because if they buy, they pay their consumer surplus and the fixed cost, and then they get it back from buying the good. Okay, and what we were doing is, this firm is selling to both high value and low value consumers. We were seeing if they can benefit by just slightly increasing their price. Okay, so this is going to have two effects on their profits. Firstly, an effect on their profits from selling to the low value consumers, and also an effect on their profits from selling to the high value consumers. For the low value consumers, okay, the price has gone up from C to C plus delta. So rather than being like that, their consumer surplus is now like this. Okay? So because their consumer surplus has gone down, the firm has got to charge them a lower fee in order to persuade them to buy anything at all. So the fee that the firm charges has to be reduced by A plus B. But because the firm's now pricing above marginal cost, they now get some producer surplus, okay, which is this area A. So from the low value consumers, the firm has lost A plus B and gained A back, meaning they've just lost B. Okay, and we do the same thing to the high value consumers. Again, the high value consumers are now paying this lower fee, so they've lost A plus B, but high value consumers are demanding this quantity here, so the producer surplus from selling to high value consumers is this box A plus B plus C. Okay, so they've lost A plus B, they've gained A plus B plus C, so in total they've gained C. Okay, so from selling to the low value consumers they lost B, from selling to high value consumers they gained C. And the trick now is just to see whether B is bigger than C. Okay, for small values of delta, as delta gets smaller and smaller, this triangle is going to decrease in size a lot faster than this square. That's the intuitive way to look at it. Imagine this line was very close. So imagine this line was here, okay? So delta was very small, and this line has gone across to there, this point has gone down, so B would be a tiny triangle like that. Okay, so the thing is, as delta decreases, this distance decreases and this distance decreases. Okay, so the area of this triangle is going to be something proportional to delta squared. Okay, whereas as delta decreases, the area of this thing C is going to stay. This distance is always going to be one of the sides of C. Okay? So the area of C is going to be this distance times delta, roughly. Okay, so the area of C is going to be something like delta, the area of B is going to be something like delta squared. So when delta is very small, okay, the delta squared must be smaller than delta, so the area of B must be smaller than the area of C. Okay, so at least for small deviations, profit must be increasing. Okay, so the firm would like to slightly increase the price per charge and slightly reduce the fixed cost. Fixed fee. Is that clearer second time round? Good. So I've got a linear example here. So two types of consumers. There's one, if you like, there's one high value consumer and one low value consumer. That's the easy way to think about it. The high value types have a demand curve of 1 minus P. The low value types have a demand curve of A minus P, where A is less than 1. Firm has a constant marginal cost C, which happens to be less than A. And the firm is offering a tariff function like this, where they pay a fixed fee F and a price P per unit demanded. Okay, so if a firm decides to sell in both markets, so what do these demand curves look like? There's 1, 1. Okay, so this is what the demand curve looks like. So we've got marginal cost, which is somewhere around here. C is less than A. So if a firm sets a price that's less than A, then it can sell both high value consumers and low value consumers will demand the good at that price. And what are their profits going to be? Well, they get two lots of the fixed cost because both the high value types and the low value types are buying it. On each unit they sell, they make a profit of price minus cost. How many units do they sell in total? Well, they sell the sum of demand from the high types and low types. Okay, so 1 plus A minus 2P. And that's what we've got right. So here's an expression. The firm would like to choose F and P in order to maximize that expression. That's their profit. This is just increasing in the level of the fixed fee, right? So the firm wants to choose F to be as high as possible. So the highest F could be is the level at which the low value consumers make zero surplus. If it goes any higher than that, then the low value consumers won't buy anything at all. And then they're going to choose P to maximize the remaining growth. Okay, so I say exercise, draw a diagram to show this means F is A minus P squared over 2. So I'm not going to go through this, but you can kind of see where it comes from. So F has to be the consumer surplus of the low value types, right? So if they're charging a price P above marginal cost, consumer surplus of the low value types is this triangle here. Okay, so this is 45 degrees because it's 1 minus P. Okay, so this distance is A minus P, this distance is A minus P. The area of this triangle is going to be A minus P squared over 2. And then once you know F is some function of P, you can maximize the whole expression and you'll find the optimum value of P. And what you find is that for price is marginal cost plus 1 minus A over 2. Okay, so if these two types of consumers are very different, so A is small, then this is big. Okay, so if the two types of consumers are very different, then you want to charge a high price. If the two types of consumers are the same, then you go back to what we had before about two-part tariffs, where the price should be equal to marginal cost. Okay, so the more different the two types of consumers are, the larger the price you want to charge and the lower the cost you want to charge. Okay, because by having a low cost, you encourage the low value consumers to go to your shop in the first place. Okay, and having a high price enables you to extract lots of money from the high value types. But it's not necessarily always true that the firm will want to sell in both markets here. Okay, the firm might like to choose a price above A, so a price up here somewhere, at which point the low value consumers won't demand any units of the good at all. Okay, and there's an exercise here which is to compare two cases and see if the firm does want to sell in both markets at those different values there. Shall we take a break there since half the class is asleep? I think you know one in particular. The main takeaway from this video is perfect representation that we made a tiny flip to the line side of the panel. Mostly weeks like the world, but the final question on the market is about this week, but it's an easy one. So the one about this week no one wants to hear a lecture. Yeah, so the last question Yeah, sure. They're like Okay, should we get going again? Does someone have a question? Okay, so is there anyone else? Okay, well I'll start. So we looked at a particular type of second degree price discrimination, namely using these two-part tariffs, right? But it's not obvious, but using a two-part tariff is necessarily the best that a firm could possibly do. Okay, in fact, they can do a little bit better than that. So what we're going to suppose is that rather than offering a two-part tariff, the firm is going to offer consumers a choice between two different bundles. Okay, the first bundle says you buy so many units, you pay a certain price. Second bundle says you buy so many units, you pay a different price. Okay, so the bundle specifies, it's an ordered pair, it specifies the quantity that someone buys and the total payment they have to make to buy that quantity. And the first thing we can realise is that if in the two-part tariff example, the high-value consumers ended up paying a total, or the high-value consumers ended up demanding QH and paying a total payment of, I don't know, TH, and the low-value consumers ended up demanding QL units and paying a total payment of TL, then you can take the solution of a two-part tariff and you can implement it using these bundles. Okay, so if you can make a certain profit with a two-part tariff, you can make exactly the same profit by offering a choice of two different bundles. Okay, because if you offer, this was the optimum quantity demanded by high-value consumers with a two-part tariff, this is the optimum quantity demanded by low-value consumers with a two-part tariff. If you give high-value and low-part consumers a choice between these two different price quantity bundles, then the high-value consumers are going to choose that one, the low-value consumers are going to choose that one. So you can certainly do at least as well as you can with a two-part tariff, just by offering consumers a choice between these different price quantity bundles. And in fact, we're going to be able to do better. So one way to see this is that in the example we just looked at, turns out that the high value type strictly prefers their bundle to the bundle given by the bundle that the low value type is consumed. Okay, so if a high value type strictly prefers their bundle to the low value type's bundle, then you can charge the high value type a little bit more and then still choose the same bundle. Okay, so we can charge the high value type more and more and more until they were just indifferent between their bundle and the low value consumer's bundle. Okay, so you can certainly increase profits in that way. And in general, the firm's profits are going to be maximised when the high value types are just indifferent between consuming their bundle and consuming the low value type's bundle. So, it's kind of unsurprising. With optimal bundles, the high value type is going to pay higher total costs than the low value type. And in fact, it turns out that it's always optimal to have the high value types consuming the efficient quantity. Okay, so consuming the quantity they consume under perfect competition. And the Church and Ware chapter I handed out has a nice graphical proof of it. What we're going to look at now is what the optimal price quantity bundles might look like. Okay, we're still doing everything graphically to make life a bit easier. Okay, and we're going to suppose that the firm is offering consumers a choice between getting a total quantity of QL and paying a total amount of B plus CQL. So that looks a bit like a two-part tariff, right? B is this area here, so it looks a bit like a two-part tariff. Right? So you either get that, or you get a total quantity of QH over here, and you pay a total payment to B plus C plus D plus E plus CQH. Okay, and we remember there's this proof in Church and Ware that high value types have to consume the efficient quantity, and if we look at how much high value types are consuming, well, it's the amount where their demand curve intersects marginal costs. Okay, so certainly with these bundles, if the high value types actually prefer this bundle, the high value types will be consuming the efficient quantity. So we want to check that this is the optimal bundle. Okay, and the first thing we have to check is that the high value types strictly prefer consuming this one to consuming that one. Sorry, weakly prefer, okay? So they're going to get like 1p extra surplus from consuming the high value bundle rather than the low value bundle. Okay, so we're going to look at the gain in value from both the low types and the high types from taking each of the two bundles in turn. Okay, so we'll start with the low type consumers. So if they decide to take the first bundle, they get QL units. Okay, so their consumer surplus is everything under the demand curve. Okay, so for consumer surplus, they get all of this area. Okay, this area here is C times QL. This area here is B. So their consumer surplus is B plus CQL. But that's the gain in value that they've got from buying the good. But they paid something to buy that good. How much have they paid? Well, according to the bundle, they get QL units and they make a total payment of this. Okay, so they gain B plus CQL and then they pay B plus CQL. So the low value types are just indifferent if they take their own bundle. Okay, in reality, you'd want B to be 1 penny extra, so they just slightly prefer to take the bundle rather than not take. Okay, but it looks like this is probably optimal, right? Because we can't extract any more from the low value consumers. If they're just indifferent, you're already extracting the most you possibly could from them. We have to check that the low value consumers don't want to take the high value bundle. Well, if they take the second bundle, what happens? If they take the second bundle, then here's their demand curve. Second bundle says they get a quantity QH. Okay, so they get this quantity here. So their value gain from consuming this product is the area under the demand curve. So it's all of this area here. So that's the area of this big box. Okay, which is, what's the area of this big box? So this one. Yeah, CQH. So they get CQH, and then we get B, and they get D, and then we have to take off this triangle F. So we get B plus D minus F plus CQH. Okay, and that's what we've got written here. So that's what they gain from taking it. However, in order to take the second bundle, they have to make this payment, B plus C plus D plus E plus CQH. Okay, so they lose that in value. So their total gain is B plus D minus F plus CQH, which we had before, minus B plus C plus D plus E, etc. plus CQH. The CQHs are going to cancel, the B's are going to cancel, the D's are going to cancel. Okay, and what you're left with is minus C, minus E, and minus F. Okay, these are all positive things, so the whole thing is negative. Okay, so for low value consumers take the second bundle, they get negative surplus. So low value consumers would never want to take the second bundle. Okay, so we certainly don't have to worry about low value consumers pretending to be high value consumers. What about the high types? Well, if the high types decide to take the first bundle, they get a quantity QL. Here's their demand curve, it's this high one. So their total gain in surplus from taking it is A plus B plus CQL, but they have to pay B plus CQL. Okay, so overall they gain A if they take the low bundle. If they take the second bundle, they get a quantity QH. Okay, so their gain in surplus is everything under this demand curve. So it's A plus B plus C plus D plus E plus CQH. Box. But remember we said they had to pay B plus C plus D plus E plus CQH. Okay, so they get, I can't even say these things anymore, A to E plus CQH minus B to E. Okay, so all that's going to be left is A. So if we take the first bundle, they get a surplus of A overall. If we take the second bundle, they get a surplus of A overall. So they're just indifferent between the two. And, we can give them 1 penny extra from taking the second bundle to ensure that they take the second bundle. So the high value types are just indifferent between taking their bundle and taking the low bundle. So it looks like we can't extract any more out of the high value types either. The low value types were indifferent between taking their bundle and not taking anything at all, so we couldn't extract anything from them. And the high value types were indifferent between taking the 2 bundles, so we could extract the maximum from them. So this must be the optimum. Okay, or the optimum has to look something like this. What are firm profits going to be like this? Well, the firm's total profits are going to be the price that the low value consumers are paying plus the price that the high value consumers are paying minus their cost of production. Okay? If we add up the payment from the low type and the payment from the high type, okay, we get this expression I've written down here. Okay, and we subtracted off cost of production. Okay, firm profits are the payments minus the cost of production, right? So it's B plus CQH, well, it's B plus E plus D plus E plus CQH, minus EQL minus CQH, okay, which just leaves you with this. 2B, 2 copies of B plus C plus D plus E. Okay, so 2B plus C plus D plus E, you can think of that, you can rewrite that expression as just A plus B plus C plus D plus E, plus another copy of B minus A. I know it seems strange to want to rewrite it like this, but once, you see why this is the same, right? We've got 2 copies of B, we've got a plus A, we've got a minus A, so that's the same as that. And why rewriting like this helps is because once we've written it like this, we have this expression here, which isn't going to be a function of QL. Okay, remember we said QH should be at the efficient level, so we know what QH is, but we don't know what QL is. So the firm wants to choose QL in order to maximise their profits overall. And if we write their profits like this, then we have this expression here, which isn't a function of QL. Because this A plus B plus C plus D plus E, that's the area of this big triangle here. Okay, and it doesn't matter where QL is, the area of the triangle is going to stay the same. So if we differentiate firm profits with respect to QL, all we're going to get is derivative of B with respect to QL minus derivative of A with respect to QL. So at a maximum, at an optimum, the derivative of B with respect to QL has to be equal to the derivative of A with respect to QL. Does someone want to point to what these derivatives are graphically? What do they look like? Can you give a graphic interpretation for this condition? You will hopelessly lost. Who was I didn't finish that. You're all good students. Come on. So B is this area, A is this area. So what happens to the area of B as you change QL? If you change QL by delta, what happens to the area of B? Yeah, it's going that way. So the increase in area is going to be what? Go on, you're about to say something. So it's just going to be this line. So all this condition is saying dBQL is just this line, and dA dQL is this line. So all this condition is saying is that an optimum QL should be chosen such that this line is the same length as this line.
Where were that?
So I'll go on the other side. So we're looking at the change in the area of B as you change QL. So if you change QL, B increases by this line, basically. And if you change A increases by this line. So this condition for an optimum just says that this line should be the same length as this line. Okay, so that's graphically what the optimum two-part tariff with two types of consumers with local level. Okay, so it's not, it's not exactly what you might expect it to look like. The low value consumers, well, they're exactly getting their consumer. They're paying their consumer surplus. They're getting no surplus overall. But the high value types are getting a surplus, right? The high value types are getting a surplus of A just from going into your shop. So you do have to give the high value types some surplus, otherwise they pretend to be low value types. And the surplus you have to give them is this area right here. Okay, I know this is tricky. I'm not quite sure how I could ask a question on that in the camera. But the take-home message is that the optimal second-degree price discrimination probably doesn't look much like a two-part tariff. Okay, the best way of doing second-degree price discrimination is to offer these price quantity bundles. And you do get price quantity bundles in the real world. If you buy a mobile phone contract, it comes with a certain fixed cost and a certain number of minutes that you get per month. Okay, so these price quantity bundles are a real thing in the real world. We know how to solve for them if we can be bothered. Okay, so we've done first and second degree price discrimination. Next is third degree price discrimination, which you can get. And this is when firms base a price on consumers' observable characteristics. So with first degree price discrimination, they're basing a price just on consumers' reservation value, which they magically knew. Here they use things that they can see and verify. So OAPs get discounts from museums, say. It's easy to see if someone's an OAP. Students get discounts on lots of things. You have to show your NUS card, so that's how they verify that you're a student. Academics get discounts for conferences. Okay, we have to register from an academic email address. Magazine price varies a lot by country, so there's kind of discrimination by what country you're buying from. So if you buy the New Statesman, it's the same magazine you get wherever you live in the European Union, but it's €5.80 everywhere except Greece, where it's €5.40, because they're not very rich in Greece, and you want to give them a lower price. Maybe it's even cheaper since we membership of the American Economic Association. So you noticed I was going to a conference in Philadelphia. That's their conference. That depends on what country you come from. If you come from a third world country, you pay a lot less than if you come from the US. So this third degree price discrimination is the most common form of price discrimination. And what the firm's going to do is the firm is going to treat each of the markets separately. Okay, so the OAPs and the non-OAPs, the students and the non-students, and it's going to set the monopoly price in that market. So let's have a quick look at the maths of this third degree price discrimination. It's really just the maths of monopoly again. So it's just a bit of revision of monopoly for you. So we're going to assume that the market is equally split between type 1 and type 2 consumers. The type 1 consumers have some demand curve P1 of the quantity they demand Q1. Type 2 consumers have some demand curve P2 of the quantity they demand Q2. So you can charge the two types different prices. That's why it's price discrimination. And the firm has some total cost function C of big Q to produce the total quantity they produce. Okay, so the total quantity they produce is Q1 plus Q2. So you're selling, your production function is producing both cinema tickets for adults and cinema tickets for students. You're using the same technology to produce both types of good, but you're able to sell them at different prices. So what are the firm's profits? Well, it sells Q1 units to the type 1 consumers at a price P1. It sells Q2 units to the type 2 consumers at a price P2. Okay, and it has total costs of C of Q1 plus Q2. So we can take the first order condition for Q1, just like normal. Okay, This is something you've seen 1,000 times now, so we use the product rule here, okay, so we get the derivative of this thing times that thing, plus the derivative of that times that. Okay, so we get P1 dash Q1 plus P1, because the derivative of Q1 with respect to Q1 is just 1, minus the derivative of total cost with respect to Q1, which is just C dash. Okay, so what we have here is the standard expression for marginal revenue, and here we've got marginal cost. Okay, so the first order condition is just saying you should set the marginal revenue from selling to type 1 consumers equal to your marginal cost. And you get exactly the same first order condition for the type 2 consumers. So you set marginal revenue for selling to type 2 consumers to their marginal cost as well. And there's an exercise there which just says you can have different numbers of the two types of consumers and you still get the same condition. Okay, so let's just write this in another way which is going to enable us to see which of the two markets will have a higher price. Okay, so we have this first order condition here, P1 dash Q1 plus P1 is marginal cost. So let's divide through everywhere by P1. Okay, so all we've done here is divided through by P1. And we've got this term in the front. That looks a bit like... Oh, which way am I going? That looks a bit like something we can work with, right? So this is Q divided by P times the derivative of P1 with respect to Q1. Okay, this thing is just, that's, this dash just means that expression there. So these two things are the same. Okay. So we want to relate this to an elasticity. Okay. So elasticities are the derivative of quantity with respect to price. So we want to flip this upside down, if you like. So we want to take the inverse. So this thing is just equal to 1 divided by P1 over Q1 times dQ1 over dQ1. Okay. Here is the definition of an elasticity. Okay, so this is just 1 over epsilon, where epsilon is the price elasticity of demand. And you should remember that these price elasticities of demand are always negative. Okay, so elastic demand means a very low number, a very large negative number. So if this thing here is just equal to 1 over epsilon, we can rewrite this expression as 1 over epsilon plus 1 is equal to marginal cost divided by price. So just rearranging that expression, it's easy to get that to price as marginal cost divided by 1 plus 1 over epsilon. So that's just a trivial rearrangement of that. So with very elastic demand, so with elastic demand, minus 1 over epsilon is going to be small. So elastic demand means epsilon is close to 0. Okay? So minus 1 over epsilon is small. So this thing is close to 1. Okay, so price is going to be approximately equal to marginal cost. Okay, so we did this here for market, for type 1 consumers. You could do exactly the same thing in the market for type 2 consumers. Okay, your marginal cost is the same in both markets because you're using the same production function to sell to both types, but the elasticity might be different in the two markets. So which market is going to have a higher price? Well, the market that's going to have the higher price is just going to be the one with the most inelastic demand. And that's what this shows us. So if you have really inelastic demand, that's going to result in that market getting a higher price. Okay, so students have quite elastic demand. You guys, you only have so much in student loan. You don't want to spend too much. You can just download movies if you don't want to pay the Odeon. So price has to be quite close to marginal cost in order to persuade you to buy the good in the first place. Okay, so students get lower prices than everyone else because your demand is more elastic. And it's just a straightforward consequence of this. And remember when we had isoelastic demand curves, epsilon was no longer a function of the price or quantity. And then this would just be the expression we got from monopoly price of isoelastic demand. Okay, so all we're saying is that you charge a higher price to the market with the inelastic demand. Okay, so we've looked at welfare for each of these types of price discrimination. First degree price discrimination was welfare improving, okay, because it was efficient. Third degree price discrimination might be welfare improving, it might not be. So there are going to be two effects going on here. So the firm is gaining, the firm is getting some extra profits, so that's good for welfare. And the way to see this is that it always has the option of charging the same price in both markets. Okay, so if it chooses not to charge the same price in both markets, it must be that that's increasing its profits. So the firm is certainly gaining, we certainly have the gain of producer surplus, and the consumers that are being offered the low price, they're going to gain something, right? The students are gaining. Maybe if everyone had to, if cinema tickets had to be sold at the same price to everyone, then perhaps that price would be too high for students and would be lower demand from students for cinema tickets. So by setting two different prices, you students are benefiting because you're getting a lower price, okay, and that's good for you. But for people being offered the high price, they're losing out. Okay, before when there wasn't any price discrimination, people who weren't students were paying the same price for cinema tickets as everyone else. Well, then the people who really valued cinema tickets were getting quite a large consumer surplus from it. Now they're getting charged a higher price, so they're getting a lower consumer surplus. Okay, so the firm is gaining, the low type consumers are gaining, but the high type consumers are losing out. Okay, because they're now having to pay a higher price than before. And there are two nice papers by Varian that show that a necessary condition for a welfare improvement is that output increases. Okay, so third degree price discrimination can only improve welfare if the total quantity being sold has increased. So if before students weren't buying cinema tickets at all, and then once price discrimination starts, students start buying cinema tickets, then there's a good chance for welfare has increased in that market. But it's a necessary condition, not a sufficient one. So for welfare to increase, this has to be true, but if this is true, it doesn't necessarily mean that welfare has increased. Okay, but generally, this is a good condition to check for if you want to look at welfare under price discrimination. The output is increased is a good sign that there's been an increase in welfare. Okay, so here's another little example of third degree price discrimination. Again, it looks a bit like this one. We've got two types of consumers. One with demand curve 1 minus P. The other one has demand curve A minus P. Okay, and A has to be less than 1. So these are our high value consumers, these are our low value consumers. What does profit look like? Well, we're assuming zero cost, zero marginal cost, no fixed cost. Okay, so profit from selling in the first market is price times quantity. Okay, this is a quadratic, right? It has a 0 at 1, it has a 0 at 0. So this must be maximized to P1 equals a half. Okay, and if P1 is a half, then Q1 is a half as well. So you want to charge a price of a half in the first market for high demand people. In the second market, we've got price times quantity. Again, this is a quadratic expression. Has a 0 at 0 and a 0 at A. Okay, so it must be maximized halfway in between. It must be maximized if P2 is A over 2. And again, this means quantity is A over 2 as well. So total output is going to be a half plus A over 2, or equivalently 1 plus A divided by 2, under discrimination. Without discrimination, the firm has several options. They can either set a high price and just sell to one type of consumer, or a medium price and sell to both types of consumers. Okay? If they decide to sell to both types of consumers, then the total quantity is going to be 1 minus P plus A minus P. Okay, so the profits from setting a price P are going to be 1 plus A minus 2P. So this is the total industry demand curve, price times quantity. And in order to avoid any differentiation, let's again write that in the same form as the expressions we had before. Okay, so you can take a 2 outside the brackets. So this thing is just the same as 2 times P times 1 plus A over 2. So those 2's are cancelling minus P. Okay, this is again, it's a quadratic, has a 0 at P, has a 0 at 1 plus A over 2. So the maximum must be halfway between those points. So it must be maximised at P equals 1 plus A divided by 4. Okay? And at that value of a price for quantity, here was for quantity. Okay, so we substitute in for price into for quantity. And you get this thing. Okay, it's boring. I'm bored. Sure, I'm more bored. Okay, it's tedious algebra. You get 1 plus A over 2. You could go through the details and do it a bit more thoroughly, but it's boring. Okay, so this is maximised when quantity is 1 plus A over 2. So under discrimination, we had a total output of 1 plus A over 2. Without discrimination, when the firm decides to sell to both markets, it's just by coincidence we get exactly the same quantity being produced. Okay, so the quantity produced hasn't increased under discrimination, so welfare certainly hasn't improved. So welfare like this, without price discrimination, must be higher than welfare with price discrimination in this example. But maybe the firm doesn't want to sell to both types of consumers without discrimination. Okay, so the firm always has the option just to sell to the high value consumers. Okay, if they just sell to the high value consumers, their demand curve is just 1 minus P. So profits are P times 1 minus P. Has to be maximised when P is a half and quantity is a half. So if without discrimination the firm chooses to only sell to high value consumers, the quantity goes from a half to 1 plus A over 2 when they start discriminating. Okay, so quantity increases in that case. So if without discrimination the firm only sells to high value consumers, and then when they start doing this price discrimination they then start selling to both types of consumers, then total quantity sold is increased, so welfare could have increased in that section. And yeah, that would generally result in an increase in welfare. And you know, a nice example of this case is where price discrimination enables or maybe doesn't enable firms to increase the quantity they sell is the market for AIDS drugs. Okay, so there's you know, a lot of people get really annoyed about big pharmaceuticals selling AIDS drugs in third world countries. Okay, but they're child these third world countries. You know, I spent some time in Mozambique, and in Mozambique, 1 in 3 people have AIDS, which is absolutely horrific, and you know, GlaxoSmithKline charging a small fortune for these AIDS drugs. Well, what happens if GlaxoSmithKline or whoever it is can price discriminate? So they can charge a different price to people in Mozambique than to people in the US. Well, before people in Mozambique couldn't afford the AIDS drugs. Now if they start price discriminating, suddenly they can afford the AIDS drugs, quantity demand is going to increase, and it's pretty clear that welfare is going to increase in that circumstance, right? So price discrimination can be really good in some circumstances. So we want to help pharmaceutical companies to price discriminate across countries. So that means we want to make it harder for people to resell drugs that they bought in Mozambique in the US. Okay, so a policy change that said, you can search people, the border police in Mozambique can search people's bags for drugs and pharmaceuticals. That would be good for welfare because it would make price discrimination easier. Okay. So that's a nice little example. And there's an exercise here about when the firm will choose to sell in both markets. Okay, so a firm will sell in both markets when discrimination is not possible if A is bigger than some constant. Okay, so if the low value types have quite high demand, then the firm chooses to sell in both markets without price discrimination. If the low value types have low enough demand, then the profit maximizing thing for the firm to do would be just to sell to the high value types without discrimination. Okay, so welfare is going to be improved by discrimination when the demand of the low types is quite a lot lower than the demand of the high types. And if you think about relative incomes in the US versus Mozambique, that's probably the case. Okay, so that was our 3 types of price discrimination, first, second, and third. In the last few minutes of the lecture, 20 minutes, I want to talk about a few other types of price discrimination. Okay, so the first one is tying. The standard example of this is printers and printer cartridges. If you buy a printer from HP, you also have to buy your printer cartridges from HP. And it's often the case that the printer cartridges cost nearly as much as the printer, which is completely crazy, right? Printers are these big, complicated things. Why on earth should printer cartridges, which could easily be refilled, cost anywhere near as much as the printer? So what's going on is that reselling printers is quite easy. It's quite easy to resell a printer. So if I tried to charge different prices to printers based on whether you were a company or just a mum wanting to print out photos of their kid, what would happen is that companies would pretend to be mums, parents wanting to print out photos of their kid. Okay, resale is so easy for printers. Firms don't really have any choice but to charge the same price for printers. Okay, but if you're a parent printing out a few photos, you're not going to demand many printer cartridges. Whereas if you're a big business, you are going to demand lots of printer cartridges. Okay, so one way you can charge effectively a different price to the 2 types of consumers is by having a fixed cost for a printer, but then making extra money on these printer cartridges. Okay, so the printer cartridges are kind of subsidizing the printer, if you know. And that way you can still maximize the surplus gain. Okay, so that's what I'm sort of saying here. It's a bit like a 2-part tariff, right? You're paying something fixed, which is getting a printer, and then you pay something marginal, which is the ink cartridges for each thing you print. And it turns out that with tying, the key condition for an improvement in welfare is whether or not, by doing this tying, they open up a new market. So maybe if tying wasn't possible, firms would sell printers at a much higher price, and thus parents wouldn't, small households wouldn't be able to afford to buy a printer. Okay, so by having these cheap printers, but expensive printer cartridges, the firm has opened up a new market. They can now sell printers to ordinary households. So welfare kind of improved in this case. There's an increase in the total demand. So, it's a general condition. There are some technical conditions, of course, but normally if output is increased, welfare is probably increased as well. So tying in printers and printer cartridges might be good for welfare. Related to tying is bundling. So tying is selling two related goods in non-fixed proportions. Okay, so you might buy one printed cartridge, you might buy 100 printed cartridges. Bundling is when you sell two related goods in fixed proportions. So a nice example of this is when you buy cable TV or Sky or whatever, you don't get to choose which channels you get. You buy all of the channels or none at all. You know, okay, there are some extra sports packages or whatever, but basically you get a Sky subscription, you get so many channels as standard. Okay, so that's a bundle of channels. You're not giving the choice of consumers to choose, well, I don't want to pay for this channel, I do want to pay for this one. Okay, and this is again another way of price discriminating, getting a bit of extra money from consumers. And here's a kind of silly example. So imagine we're two types of consumers, we're jocks and geeks. I'm a geek, okay, so like I value Discovery Channel at 20, and I don't really care about sports, so I value Sky Sports at 8. Okay, so my total amount I'm prepared to pay for both Sky Sports and Discovery is 20. Maybe you rebel sitting at the back at Jocks. You value Sky Sports at 15, but you don't really care about the Discovery Channel, maybe you value that at 10. Okay, so your total value is 25. So if you sell the channels separately, and remove as many geeks as jocks, then the optimum price to sell Sky Sports at is 8, because if you set a price of you can set a price of 15 and just sell to jocks, but you're better off selling a price of 8 because then you sell both jocks and geeks. So 2 times 8 is bigger than 15. Okay? So optimum price for Sky Sports is 8. Optimum price for Discovery is 10 if you're selling the channels separately. Okay, so your total revenue is going to be 8 plus 10, so 18. But if you sell the bundle together, well, even the geeks are prepared to pay 20 overall. Okay, so you can sell the whole bundle for 20. So whereas you only make 18 revenue from selling the channels separately, if you sell the bundle, you make 20 average revenue. And there's a little exercise there. Okay, so the key thing that makes bundling profitable is that different consumers' valuations are negatively correlated. So, you know, jocks like Sky Sports and not the Discovery Channel, geeks like Discovery and not Sky Sports. Okay, so the preferences have to be kind of the opposite of each other for bundling to work. And again, you know, it's just another way of extracting a bit of extra consumer surplus. So pure bundling is when you don't give people the opportunity of buying the goods separately. They can only buy the bundle. They can't possibly buy one good without the other. Mixed bundling is when you both sell the bundle and you sell the goods separately. So Microsoft do mixed bundling. You can buy the whole of Office, or you can buy Word and Excel separately. So here are maybe there are 3 types of people: writers, accountants, and generalists. So there are 40 writers, 40% of people are writers, 40% of people are accountants, 20% of people are generalists. The writers like Word, but they don't use Excel at all. Okay, so their total valuation is 50. The accountants only use Excel, their total valuation is 50. These generalists, they use a bit of Word and a bit of Excel, so they value a combination of 60. And you can go through the different strategies for the firm, okay, so they can sell both Word and Excel separately and not the bundle. If they do that, we choose different prices as well. So we can sell them both at 30. If you sell them both at 30, then everyone is then the writers and the generalists by Word, the accountants and the generalists by Excel. Okay, that makes you a total revenue of 100. Okay, so you're selling that you're selling 60 copies of Word, you're selling 60 copies of Excel. Okay, so in total you're selling 120 units at the price of 30 each, making you a revenue of 3,600. So that's one thing you could do if you're a Microsoft. Another thing you could do would be to sell Word and Excel both at a higher price of 50. If you sell them at 50, then the generalists don't want to buy anymore. So you sell 50 units of Word, 50 units of Excel. 40 units of Word, 40 units of Excel. So you sell 80 copies in total, which turns out to make you slightly higher revenue. You could also sell Word and Excel in a bundle. Okay, maybe you want to sell the bundle at a price of 50. Well, if you sell the bundle at a price of 50, then everyone is prepared to buy. Okay, everyone has a total valuation of 50 or higher. So you sell 100 units of a bundle at 50, makes you 5,000. So bundling is helping here. So that's better than either of those two. But you can also do a mix. Okay, this is a silly strategy. You can sell the bundle at an even higher price, but that's not going to help. The interesting one is this one, 5, where you sell both the products separately and you sell the bundle as well. Okay, so you sell the products separately at a price of 50 and in a bundle at a price of 60. Okay, then the writers will buy Word, the accountants will buy Excel, and the generalists buy the bundle. And this is going to make you a revenue of 80 copies of Word or Excel, 20 copies of the bundle. Okay, so total revenue of 5,200. So this is even better than just pure revenue. Okay, so by selling these mixed bundles, a firm can even further increase their profits. Time is up. I'll leave durable goods until next week. Okay, there are some exercises here. Okay, so to conclude, price discrimination is generally going to enable firms to extract additional profit. Durable goods are one of the cases when price discrimination doesn't increase profit, and we'll look at that next week. If consumer characteristics are observable, then firms are going to perform first or third degree price discrimination. Generally, third is first degree. If they're unobservable, they perform second degree price discrimination and get firms to self-select between the different bundles. And for various other things, versioning, tying, bundling, also give ways for firms to discriminate. And the key condition for an improvement in welfare is that the discrimination is opening new markets, increasing output. Someone asked about putting answers to the last year's mock test. I'll grudgingly do that. There'll be a comment from last year's blog post with a link to the answers. So I'm not going to make it too easy for you to find. That's the price you pay.
It's part of discrimination. It's what we did this week.
Well, if you look at the mock test, it's just one question on the easy thing from the end.